Hello, and welcome to the Career Change Diaries podcast with me, Alice Stapleton. And today we are speaking to Rachel Schofield, who worked for the BBC for 20 years as a journalist and a news presenter before retraining as a career and personal development coach. And she's also written a really helpful book called The Career Change Guide: 5 Steps to Finding Your Dream Job, which is published by Penguin, which is an amazing achievement. Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Hi, Alice. Yeah, really well. Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yes, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. So, we're going to have quite an interesting chat with Rachel because obviously we're going to speak to her about her career change. But also, what I'm quite interested in talking to you about is your experiences with clients who are changing career and talking through the fears that they face, what holds them back. And your suggestions for how they can overcome those barriers. So I think with Rachel, you mainly work with people midlife, is that right? Or are you seeing everyone?
No,
Across
so
the
yeah, most
ages?
of my clients, I would say, are anywhere from their kind of mid to late 30s up to around their early 50s, actually. So quite a range of people. Yeah, but
Yeah.
certainly people who've already had quite an established career of one kind or another and are thinking, oh gosh, have I left it too late? I'd quite like to make a change, but
Yeah.
what does that look like because I'm that bit older, perhaps?
Yeah. Which is really great to hear because, I have clients in their late 20s and they're thinking, oh my God, have I left it too late? And I'm always saying, well, actually, there are coaches that work with, career change as well into their 50s. I
Yeah.
think that's quite
That's so funny because sometimes I get slightly younger clients and I almost wanted to laugh. I mean, in a lovely way, but I had a client who was, I think, 27 who said, I just think probably I should have done this 5 years ago. And I was like, look, I've got people on my books who are kind of 56 or
Yeah.
49 and they're doing it. So I said, you are at a great moment. So really,
Yeah.
people worry at all ages that they've left it too late. But of course, with a bit of creativity and curiosity and focus and commitment, there's nothing to stop you at least having a look and seeing what's possible.
Yeah. Well, we work so late into our lives now, probably won't be retiring until we're, I don't know, 80 by the time I
I know
get
it
to
just
it.
feels like it's
I
creeping up
know.
and
I
up. But
know.
yeah, and I think there's a realization that this model that you do the same thing for 40 years and then say thanks very much and you get your kind of crystal fruit bowl and a clock and there you go. It's just not like that, is it? I think this expectation that you plow one pathway, you just move up the ladder and then you get to the top and then all that's coincided very nicely with me retiring. Of course, no, it looks very different now. And I think we can expect to all have different careers. And it doesn't mean that you can't chop and change, quite late on, because the world is changing and we're changing and work is changing. And we need to embrace that idea that we can do different things at different periods of our life.
Yeah. Well, and thank God for that. I
Mm.
always thought that whole idea of career for life sounded a little bit dull. But yeah, I think when you change careers, sort of appreciating that you're going to pivot around the space that you move into. It's not just going to be that one thing that you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And I often say to people, even when we're working on what feels like the career change, what we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later, but this idea of people going, but what if I get it wrong? They're almost like, I've got this one shot at it, but I'm making the change, which will then see me through the next 20 years. But actually, in reality, even when you make the change, the pivot, it's probably going to alter again. Perhaps, okay, you're not looking to make another big change, but everything evolves and shifts through
Yeah.
either your own drivers and motivations and needs and situation, or also the way that your work naturally changes. So even the idea that you make a career change and it's one monumental thing isn't really the reality, is it? You make a
Yeah.
shift, and then again, even within that one shift, there will be other new pathways or little diversions or little meanderings off somewhere else. It's going to keep moving. And I think the more we can embrace that and enjoy that and not fear it,
Yeah.
the better we'll do.
Yeah, absolutely. I always use this analogy of is putting your career ladder up against the right building. and accepting that you'll go in that building and you'll move around all the rooms, but you don't know what rooms are in there until you get in there.
Yeah.
And then you might build a little bridge over to the next building.
Build an extension, redo the colours, put up some new cut. I love that analogy because it's true. There's so many unknown unknowns that, even as you make a shift, you think it's going to look this way. But often, even when you then 2 years in, you suddenly go, oh, there's this whole other bit of the garden I'd never even seen, but that looks quite interesting. So yeah, it keeps changing, doesn't it? And that's a good.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of that. Those memes that you see on social media, that line of what you think success looks like, and it's sort of this beautiful straight line, and then actually what it looks like is this huge wiggly
big
path.
curly swirly, goes all over the place.
Okay, well, interesting introduction to career change. So first of all, I'd love to hear a bit more about your own career change. So tell me a little bit about life and work at the BBC then.
Yeah. So I feel for me, I had definitely had what was looking like one of those kind of one place careers that was probably quite old fashioned in a way. That I read modern languages at university. I liked drama. I was interested in journalism. I did some student radio. Realized, I think I'm going to train as a journalist. So I did a year's postgraduate course when I was 21. And then through that, got some work experience with the BBC that turned into a job. And then I stayed for, nearly 20 years and worked my way up, as most people do, from kind of local TV and radio up in the Northeast. And then gradually, the pull of London and the bright lights, and can I get onto sort of national news, moved my way back down to London to work on Radio 4, and then eventually did the bulk of my career as a presenter on what was then the BBC News Channel. So the rolling 24-hour news, covering everything from domestic politics to foreign news, a lot of breaking news. Thought I'd probably be at the BBC forever. I had that kind of, if you opened me up like a stick of rock, it said BBC through it. So that was my only experience of work, really. I was there for a long time, but then got to that point, as many people do, where I thought, do I want to do this for the next 20 years? And I just wasn't totally sure.
Right. So tell me a bit more about what those niggles and challenges were that started to happen that made you think, well, maybe I need to change things.
Yeah, and I think they probably were niggles. I think, like a lot of people, when I talk to clients, they're things that it's a slow burn, isn't it? You start to think, do I enjoy this as much as I used to? Does it work for me? And it had worked for me in many ways. I mean, I started as full time, in my 20s, and then I got married and we had a family, so I went part time, which was great. The BBC was really good with that, and it worked very well as a presenter in particular, because you're essentially doing shift work. You come in at a particular time, you clock off at a particular time. So it wasn't the kind of long job that a reporter might have, where you suddenly think, oh gosh, there's a new development, I'm going to have to stay till midnight and follow this. So it worked for me. The BBC was great. I was able to go part time. I eventually went freelance when, again, I started to think, I'd like a bit more flexibility. And that was easy to do back then. I could just almost switch to becoming a freelancer, but there was plenty of work. But over time, I think I just started to feel that it didn't work for me on some level. I think maybe I just had done it so long. And some of the hours, the shifts, I didn't always love it. I'm an early person, so I'd always love the breakfast kind of shifts, the early shifts, but doing late shifts where you come off air at midnight, I'd really be flagging. And also, although in a way news is great because often there's new stuff, that's the nature of news. Ultimately, it's also quite kind of cyclical, and you think, gosh, I've done Davos, or I've done, particular cabinet reshuffle. Certain stories come around regularly. And when you've done that for 20 years, although on the outside that looks very exciting, sometimes you're just like, oh, here we go again. And I think for me, the biggest niggle actually was less about the mechanics, because on some level, I still really enjoyed being in a TV studio. I had lovely, brilliant colleagues. The BBC is full of really super smart, enthusiastic, talented people. So there was lots I enjoyed. I think it was the content that eventually did for me, which kind of comes back to perhaps one's values at work, which is something, as a coach, I look at with people. But it was probably Brexit that pushed me over the edge. Because, for 2 years, we did this same story over and over again. And in a way, as a journalist, you want to really dig into that for people and help make sense of it, really get under the skin of a story, try and challenge and push and unpick and make things clear for people. But eventually, I think it was the fact that I would turn up day after day, and no matter how many angles you try and find on this story, no matter how many interesting or clever questions or challenging questions, I was interviewing a lot of politicians. And of course, politicians are masters of just giving the answers that they want. And they're very often very entrenched in their positions. And I think I just got fed up thinking, no matter what I ask these people, I know what they're going to say. This is not a conversation. This is just a kind of, this is a soundbite. This is a press release. And how can I get around that? And I think what I started to realize was I wanted to have conversations with people where I was getting to something more real and authentic, where I was going to ask questions that people would really engage with rather than just give me the answer they'd prepared, 6 hours earlier, regardless of what I asked them. So I think for me, that value of sort of authenticity and really educating people, sharing something started to not be met. And I used to think, I don't want this because I feel I'm just banging my head against a brick wall. So I think at that point, I started to think, I want to use a lot of my same skills. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy questioning. I enjoy digging around, but I want a different outcome. And that combined with the fact that I wasn't necessarily enjoying the kind of shift work that I was doing, and I just wanted a change, I think gradually led me to think maybe it's time for something different.
Fascinating. And it just sort of struck me there that we can look at people in their careers and just think like they've got it all, especially with like people on the TV. I don't know, I suppose we're just a bit obsessed with people that are on the TV for some reason. And you just wouldn't know that any of that kind of conflict or dilemma goes on for people. It's really weird. You sort of forget that behind the job, there's a human being with, as you say, values and needs and wants and going through transitions and expectation management and all these things whilst having to deliver a day job, which sounds like the sort of routine of it just started to
and I do sometimes think that, because on the surface of it, being a news presenter sounds very sexy and very exciting, and not to diminish it. In many ways, it's a great job. So there were days early on I'd be like, I get paid to do this. This is fun. This is interesting. But I think with any work, even the things that externally look very glamorous and exciting, when you've done something for a long time, you eventually, we're human beings. We need to be stretched and challenged. And I think for me, the turning point was, of course, as with all jobs, there's room for change and maneuver within your role or within your world. So, I had started to think, should I look to maybe move out of news and try and do more documentary work? Or should I think about moving from the BBC to somewhere like Sky and just having a change of scene? And I think it was when I realized that when I was looking at those questions, I wasn't excited to hustle for more of the same or a slight change, that I realized maybe I need something more and something different. And similarly to our starting point of my age, so I'm now 47, I guess when I started thinking about this, I was sort of in my early 40s. You get to that thing of, well, now's a good time, actually. I don't want to leave it too late. I've still got quite a lot of working life to go. So it seems like let's embrace this and engage with it seriously, because I might have 30 years and perhaps there's time to build something new and start something different.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and talk me through that process then. So it sounds like you played around with the practicalities, going freelance and that sort of thing. And then you're starting to think about going to other channels. So what ideas were you having at that stage about what else you wanted to do? And just talk me through some of those sort of thoughts and fears and doubts and concerns that you had at that time, if any, actually.
Oh, no, I definitely did. I'd love to say there was a process. As somebody who now works with people in this space and has a very clear process and a structure that I take them through. I had no process. I had no structure, that came later once I'd retrained. So it really was like it is for most people a bit of a sort of fumble in the dark. And trying to think of what could I do? What should I do? What would be fun? What am I equipped to do? All of those big questions that you wrestle with. Am I bonkers? That often comes, I
Yeah.
work for a reputable, well-known international organization. It was a sort of a lovely, secure cloak. I'd been for years very proud of being able to say I work for the BBC. And thinking, am I ready to let go of that? That seems a bit bonkers.
So
Because
it's
people in
almost, I was just going to say, almost like the whole identity then,
Yeah.
like it's almost like your whole self.
Yeah, hugely, because, partly, I mean, I'm not some famous newsreader, but, I had a level of profile, albeit at, quite a small level. But also the BBC is such an easy shorthand where people say, where do you work? And you say, I'm at the BBC. People, and this will sound shallow, but I think people will understand it. There's a kudos that comes with that. People,
Yeah,
you work at the
definitely.
BBC.
Yeah.
Tell me more. People are interested. So to let go of that, or even to consider letting go of that, did feel quite risky. I think it's different if you do a job that everyone kind of yawns at. If you say, I'm an accountant, people never ask you a single follow-up question. Perhaps it doesn't have quite the same sense of, I'm leaving something special. But actually, even if you do something that doesn't necessarily wow the world, it is your identity, as you say, and to be ready to let go of that and step into a space where you're not quite sure who you are and what you stand for is really challenging. But for me, it was much more of there was never a moment where I was like, right, I'm going to leave. I just thought I need to start exploring other things. And I think actually that, now that I work in this space is a really great approach. But for me, that was just born out of where I was and necessity. I wasn't ready to I wasn't hating it. I wasn't ready to sort of flounce out in a big huff. I just was getting curious about what might be possible. So for me, I just thought maybe coaching. I had some ideas. I thought maybe I'll go. A lot of ex-journos go into media training, for example. So they go and train people about how to really present well. So there was a thought about that. And the second thought that came with that, as other people will recognize, is, well, if I step into a new space, do I need some kind of qualification? Do I need some sort of credibility stamp? So the idea of coaching, although it's not the same as training by any means, but it felt like it was a way of saying, I've got something to offer. I've got a piece of paper. And it interested me. And I thought, well, it uses some of the same skill sets. It's all about questioning and listening.
Yeah, well, and actually getting an answer, not just
actually somebody who wants to listen to the question.
Yeah.
So I just went into it very gingerly. I thought, as I say, I was freelance, so I was part-time anyway. So I had a bit of time and space in my world. Our kids were getting a bit bigger. So I'm mindful that I was quite privileged in that position. Also, I should say at this point, my husband was the main earner in the family. So, I'm always conscious that I had some space to do that. So I thought, well, I'm going to do this coaching qualification. I went along to a taster session and thought, yeah, this interests me. So I didn't just sign up with nothing, but I'd done a little bit of due diligence and thought that could be interesting.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask how you even came across coaching? Like, how did you
good question. And then I'm going back 5 years. I ought to know more about it. I can't think.
It was just sort of already in your.
It must have just been in my peripheral vision somehow. So I trained with an organization called the Coaching Academy. So whether I'd seen their stuff online or I don't think I knew anybody particularly who was a coach. So it's a really good question. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer as to how I knew about
I imagine, with the media training, maybe it was sort of in that space, or maybe
yes, perhaps because I was starting to think about coaching in what I first understood as coaching as sort of training. Perhaps when I started Googling around coaching, media coach, perhaps I then realized that actually proper coaching is something very different because it's much less didactic and training. But yeah.
So you did the taster, and I think I did that one as well, actually. And it's really good. It's like a free, pre-COVID, it was like a free weekend.
It was 2 days in a hotel in London. I'm based in London, so I think it was somewhere near Earl's Court. It was in person, which, what a joy, before everything became tiny boxes on Zoom. So it was a kind of no-brainer. It was only a sort of 6 stops on the district line for me, and it was free and I could go along. And I just thought I'm interested enough. And I stress that because it wasn't, again, it's tricky when you're in a career change space. Obviously, if you're about to invest a lot of time and money, you want to feel pretty sure, but I wasn't 100%. I know what I'm going to do with this. I certainly didn't know I was going to become a career coach. I just thought, I'm interested enough. I think this will be a valuable qualification for me, even if I end up staying in the media in some way. I thought I like it. And again, I stress I was lucky that I had the ability to finance that, even if it hadn't turned into my dream job. So I'm mindful of that. But I was ready to I thought, I'll enjoy learning. I'll enjoy having a new challenge, adding a new string to my bow. I'll figure out what I might want to do with it later. And it was very part-time. So it wasn't like I had to stop and then commit a big chunk of time with no income. I was able to do that alongside my BBC work, just with an open mind as to this could be fun. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I remember listening to another coach and they were talking about sort of following the fairy lights. You know, it doesn't have to be this big strike of lightning where you realize, oh, that's what I was born to do. It's more just follow those little sparks, those little fairy lights, and kind of follow your nose almost. And it sounds like that's what you did. You just
I absolutely did.
Sounds interesting.
There was enough of a little glimmer. That's a lovely visual. To make me think I'm going to tread along this pathway. And I didn't feel it was going to be a narrowing. I thought whatever happens, it's opening up new options, and it had enough variety. I realized that there are lots of different kinds of coaches, some of who work in a kind of corporate sphere, other people who are kind of health coaches or relationship coaches, life coach. So I just thought there's scope here. This can take me somewhere. It's not going to be a bad thing. And I can do it alongside what I'm doing. So it doesn't require a sudden right, this is exactly what I'm doing. So yes, I followed the fairy lights.
Okay. So you do the course. Well, you do the weekend. You enjoy that. Sounds like that then prompts you to sign up to the course.
Yeah.
Talk me through the journey.
So I signed up to the course, which back again, it's now all online, but in my day, pre-COVID, it meant a certain number of days, Saturdays, having a big long training day in person. It required obviously some online content as well. It required building up a number of hours, coaching hours with guinea pigs. The most scary thing when someone says, go and find some people to coach. And you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. But, you beg, borrow and steal friends and family and friends of friends and say, can I coach you?
Yeah. And how did that feel? Because I imagine, you've gone from a career, 20 years experience, to a point where it's, second nature by the sounds of it. How did it feel then stepping into something that, no experience, training to do something new? Because I think a lot of clients, they kind of worry about that. Oh, I'm going to lose all that sort of sense of self and credibility and expertise. Don't want to start from scratch again. So how does that feel to you?
Yeah, it felt uncomfortable, definitely. I totally reckon. And it's lovely that I did this journey because, as you say, we see it in our clients so much. It is that thing of, I don't know what I'm doing. And, that's fine when you're 9 or when you're 12 and you're at school and someone says, let's learn Latin or let's look at this physics, equation. You're like, well, that's fine. I'm in a learning space. I'm new to this. But when you're in your 40s, you're like, oh, I don't know if I like this feeling. Like you say, as a journalist, I could do it in my sleep. It's nothing to me to go into a studio and present. And I loved, the fact that came to me very naturally. And suddenly I'm in a space where I'm thinking, I'm making a hash of this. I'm not sure I'm very good at this. But of course, it was a safe space and everyone was the same. We were all learning together. But yeah, there were times when I did think, oh, gosh, this is weird to be a beginner at something. I haven't done this since I was at school. And I definitely empathize. A lot of clients come with that of, gosh, I'm going to have to step back into a new space. I'm going to have to be a learner. I'm going to have to start from scratch. And we can discuss that later. I mean, obviously, that's not always true in a lot of cases, actually. But certainly if you're going for a new qualification or upskilling in some way, you have to make peace with the fact that you're going to be in a new space. And I think it's that shift of thinking, let's see this as exciting. Let's see this as growth and a learning opportunity rather than that kind of panic of, I don't know what on earth I'm up to here. But that's an ongoing process. You can't just say that to yourself one day. Especially it's one thing to be in the classroom as a coach and just be learning and having someone train you and you're taking all your notes and think, oh, this is terribly interesting. But when they then say, right, coach somebody, and you've got like the rudimentary model and you've only ever practiced with someone else, just one-to-one with nobody listening in the safe space of a coach training academy, and suddenly you've asked someone, okay, they're not paying you. You normally clock up your practice hours for free. But to meet someone in a coffee shop, as I used to do then, who's a friend of a friend, doesn't really know me from Adam, and I'm saying to them, right, what are you bringing to coaching today? And they tell me, and I think, oh, I don't know what to do with that. Oh, what's the model? Well, right, we need a goal. Okay. And it was difficult, but exciting as well and exhilarating. And when something goes well and you think, actually, maybe I'm quite decent at this. And also when you can see, saying about drawing on things you already have, when you think, actually, this isn't totally new. I'm a functioning adult. I've done hard things. I know I'm a good communicator because I've used that in my previous job. I know I can ask good questions. So it's sort of when you can start to join the dots and try and think, I'm not starting fresh. I'm learning some new things, but I am pulling on skills and experiences and wisdom that I already have. That helps a lot as well, I think, that you're not saying this is a total clean slate. You're saying I'm already bringing something to the party and I'm enhancing it and growing.
Definitely. And just utilizing those innate strengths and qualities that you appear to enjoy using. You sort of extracted all of the themes and all the bits that you loved about what you were doing before into a different context. I suppose I did that a little bit with working with offenders and rehabilitating. It's all the same sort of skill set as a coach because you're working with people, and I knew that that's what I like doing. It's sort of changing the context of it. Yeah, and I think just going back to what you said, often what I say to clients is exactly what you said is, you're telling me you want growth and challenge and learning, and this new step is going to give you all of those things, and almost seeing that uncomfortable, difficult period as part of the career transition in itself, not something awkward that needs to be jumped through in order to get to where you want, actually seeing it as part of the journey and the whole story in itself, as opposed to something just to kind of get out the way before you get to what you really want.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think those words like journey and transition are probably much more helpful actually for people thinking about making a shift, because we think a career change sounds like a kind of one and you're done. One day you decide and you make a change and it's done in the same way that, you change money at a foreign currency bureau or something. It's a kind of transaction. You just do it once and you've made the change. But I think the most challenging thing about making a career shift is the fact it takes time. And there are bits that are uncomfortable. But if you can embrace that and know in advance that that's normal, it is a journey, it is a transition, it's not just going to happen miraculously. There are moments where it will feel muddled and it will feel a bit awkward and it will feel a bit uncomfortable. But through all of that, you are on a journey that's taking you to the right destination, and you're amassing all these new skills, your confidence is growing, you are becoming this new person. But it takes time to transition. So it's good to think of it like that. Maybe we even need a new vocabulary. It's not a career change like, oh, right, on Monday, I'm making my career change. It's a process, and leaning into the muddle is important.
Definitely. Yeah, I always talk about it's a bit like going in, it's like you're a train going through a tunnel, and the light disappears from where you've gone in, and then you're in this weird like liminal stage where you still can't really see the light at the other end of the tunnel. You're just in this kind of like black space, and that's really uncomfortable, and your whole identity shifts and you don't know what you're doing. But slowly but surely you move through that tunnel, and gradually the light at the end of it gets brighter and brighter, and you start to see where you're headed. Okay, so you do the course. So then how do you start to make the whole shift really start to happen?
Yeah, so I did that initial course. So then, and of course, it's that one thing, particularly with something like coaching, or if you train, if your career shift involves then setting up on your own, you've then got the next challenge, because it's not then necessarily that you go and apply for a job. You are building a business, and then you're into a whole other zone of like, okay, this is new, which at times is really exciting and at times is really scary. And of course, you come into the world going, yes, I have a piece of paper, I'm a coach. And you're like, yeah, but a coach needs some clients. It's no good being a coach sitting around doing nothing. So yeah, I think that was then the next bit of the journey, was thinking, well, who do I want to coach and how do I find them? So I've sort of slightly moved, as a lot of coaches do. And it was same with all kinds of work, things evolve. So I started off thinking I'm going to work with a lot of women returners, partly because through my coaching qualification, a lot of the people I'd practiced on were friends of friends. And my world of kind of middle-aged women, a lot of mums, meant that I had coached quite a few women who were looking to get back into work after some time off raising a family and things like that. So that was where I kind of niched myself initially. But it was a slow burn, again, because you're newly qualified, particularly in the coaching sphere. So this doesn't go for everything, but I wasn't able to necessarily charge really high fees, or I had to sort of do with what suited the industry. I was a new coach and I had to grow that business. So I started finding people. I got onto Instagram, but again, that's a slow burn, building a new profile as a new person. I used my network. And tried to say to people, I'm doing this. Do you know anybody who might want some coaching? And I suppose what's interesting to me when I look at it now is initially I probably didn't go at it with a huge drive, because I was still doing my BBC work. So I was able to just gradually build it up, because I had that safety net. And I think a lot of people through career change do run things in parallel, particularly if they're doing something that involves building their own business. It makes sense to think, can I hang on in some way to what I already do? For me, I was already freelance, so I had some flexibility. Other people might think about, well, perhaps I could go part-time. Maybe I could lose one day a week or free up one day a fortnight, so that you can do the two things in tandem. So I started to do that. I then also realized I wanted some additional training, because a lot of the women who were then coming to me were thinking about a career change. And yes, I had some really great coaching skills, but I didn't have particularly a framework for career change. So I went on to do a further, shorter, smaller, more intensive qualification called Firework Career Coaching. That's how you and I met, Alice. And that was for people who are already coaches. So it's not something you can do if you're not a coach. But then added that. And that really gave me a boost, actually, because I then had a specialism and was able to think, no, I'm a career coach now. I have a really great framework that I can offer people to work through. But yeah, all through that time, it was just building up gradually and starting that process of getting myself out there and saying what I did. I think for me, though, when I reflect on it, the final kind of push was COVID happening. So with COVID at the BBC, as with everywhere else, everything became small. They wanted far fewer people in the newsroom. We had two channels that broadcast news. One was BBC World, which is the one that, if you're British, you see kind of in hotel rooms and airports. So it's an outer facing channel. It's got a lot of foreign news. It's aimed at a foreign audience. And there was BBC News Channel, which is more domestic news, which is what I was on. Once COVID happened, of course, they're trying to have fewer people in the building. They combined those two channels. And that meant that the presenter effort was halved. So even staff presenters, people who were on the books at the BBC, weren't necessarily needed as much as they would be. And of course, freelancers like myself, who were often brought in to cover illness or when they were short of presenters, just weren't needed because they had excess. So with COVID, I sort of saw the writing on the wall. I thought, actually, my freelance work is going to dry up. And I was strangely at peace with that. It was kind of the kick up the bum that I needed to be like, okay, so now, we hit the reality of, you've got these coaching qualifications. You've made a kind of slightly gentle start because you've had the backup of the BBC, but now you're in a position where you can see the BBC work is going away. This is what you wanted, Rachel, even though you're like, oh my gosh. So at that point I thought, okay, now's the time to step up and take this seriously. You're either doing this or you're not, And I think that was the push where I thought, right, I need a decent website, which I did myself. Again, I didn't want to invest a lot of money. Often people don't when they're making a shift. Don't have lots to throw around. So I thought, get my good website up. I start really kind of posting on social media, trying to get myself out there a bit more. And gradually, I don't want to make it sound like it was an overnight, here I am, here's a full living.
How long has that taken, out of interest? So, well, I mean, I suppose you mentioned COVID there, but it sounded like it was, a little bit before that. So how long has that been, I suppose, maybe from that taster weekend with the...
Yeah, so I think the taster weekend, I'll have to try and get this right, was probably 2019. I took about a year to do that initial coaching qualification. So I think that took me to kind of January, February 2020. So I'd started to and I had signed up by then for the additional coaching qualification, which was going to be over the summer of 2020. So all of that pretty much combined, because I think COVID, really the first big lockdown was kind of March 2020, wasn't it? So it was all coming at around the same time, that it was almost just the right amount of pressure from the fact my BBC work was coming to an end, and I was ramping up my own qualifications, that probably I then really started in earnest in the kind of autumn of 2020 into the kind of beginning of 2021. Because I sort of gave myself a bit of time over the summer. I got kids, and then that my BBC work had gone quiet. I was fully qualified. I'd done my additional career coaching, and I thought, okay. But so now we're what, sort of 2 years on, and it's taken that amount of time to build things up. Yeah,
it takes time, and I think that's helpful. If you're looking, then that's sort of what, four-ish years. Sometimes when I talk to clients at the beginning and I talk about timeframes, and I'll say, if you do decide to do something quite different, we could be working together for the next couple of years. And sometimes their faces are like, what? No, I want to change career in 3 weeks, please. Yeah, and I think it's just helpful to hear that sort of reality of it. I mean, mine was. I mean, I know it's different if maybe you're building up a business. I think it took me, working in a previous career, sort of 5 years or so, to build up the business and really shift into something completely different. So yeah, I think it's helpful to sort of acknowledge that it can take time, but definitely worth it. And also to hear what goes on behind the scenes. I think especially with Instagram, you sort of think that people have just arrived in their new career the next day. And I think it's helpful to, remember that there's been a build up and there's been grinding, grafting along the way. And takes time, definitely. Okay, so now we arrive today, and you've written a book as well, which I'm very impressed with. Where you found the time to do that, I've no idea, along with everything else that you do. And it sounds like that's a kind of overview of your career change process that you do with clients.
Yeah, no,
have you got a copy there? Nice plug there if you're watching it on YouTube. Yeah, the Career Change Guide.
Yeah,
and that's available on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, all good bookshops. You can get it on Kindle and Audible, and it's Penguin, so it's easy to find.
Okay, and that's a good place for people to work through their own steps towards changing career.
Yeah, so it's a kind of 5-step process to help people who want to who maybe don't have the budget to work with a coach, or like to kind of self-pace and do their own thing. It's a way of taking you from that sort of germ of I'd like to change career to kind of gearing up their mindset. You and I have talked quite a lot about all the little voices in the head that kind of worry you about how's this going to look and how do I deal with all the muddle. So thinking about mindset, thinking about working out who you are and what you want, of course, because that's the hardest bit, is the kind of, well, I know I want something different, but I'm not quite sure what and what's important to me and what would I be good at and what are my options. So it's all that kind of stuff. It's got lots of exercises. It's got work on how do you find ideas, what you might want to do. And of course, the practical bit of when you've thought, I think it's this, how do you make it happen? Because it's one thing to have a genius idea or think I'm ready to do this kind of line of work. But of course, there are ways that you need to go about exploring that, expanding your network, revamping all your messaging, whether that's your CV or LinkedIn. So hopefully it takes people, holds their hand through the whole process, and also features what you're doing brilliantly here, Alice, with the podcast. It features, stories of people who've done it. Because yes, that there's a process that you and I use with people that we think works really well. But inevitably, every journey is a little bit individual. People have different background settings. People have different budgets and financial constraints or family situations. So it's really lovely, isn't it, to lean into people's stories and think, oh, yeah, that resonates with me. Or yes, I'd be better to go at it that way than this way. Or yes, I feel the same as that person. I'm glad it's not just me. So I think it's really powerful. The stories are the career changers.
Definitely. Okay, well, and that's got me thinking. So with the people that you work with, and obviously they'll be perhaps similar to people I work with as well, What do you find are the biggest fears or barriers that are preventing people from changing career or just changing
Mhm.
generally, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's probably, I always feel like you and I could probably play a game of kind of career change fear bingo, couldn't we? Certain things
Yeah,
that always
yeah.
come up.
But I hope that's reassuring to
Mm.
people because it feels like such a unique, isolating experience. You know, you think everyone else has got it all figured out, and why not me? And so, yeah, I think the fact that you could have a bit of a bingo and it comes to those, I hope is reassuring for people to hear.
Yeah, I hope
So,
it
yeah,
is.
what would be on the bingo
Yeah,
sheet
yeah, because
then?
that's not to be flippant, exactly what you said.
Exactly.
It's to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
the things that are hitting you in the face like cold fish are the same things that hit everybody. They hit me,
Yeah,
they
because
hit
you're
you,
only
Alice,
human.
when
Yeah,
you
you're
did it.
only human.
It's
Yeah.
all of those things. It's the kind of sense of, I'm not sure I've got it in me. So there's a lot often around confidence and mindset, oh gosh,
Mm-hmm.
I've left it too late. I don't think I can make it work. It's a lot around what will other people think,
Mm-hmm.
or how will I be
Mm-hmm.
judged if I used to be a teacher and now I say I want to be a graphic designer. It's the sense of, practically, can I afford it? How do I make this happen? Will I have to start
Yeah.
at the beginning and take a massive pay cut? It's the time scale. It's like, oh gosh, can I give the right amount of time and commitment to this? It's the sense of, I think one of the things that trips people up is it's a massive barrier because I think it's about people thinking they need to know it all before they start. I think it's people thinking that if they think for long enough, they'll get the answer. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that keeps people stuck because all they do is just stay in their own little loop of thoughts of like, I want to
Mm.
do a career change, not sure I know what it looks like. I'll think a bit more, Google a few things. I still don't know. I'm never going to know. Oh gosh, I'll just park it. And then 6 months later, I think I want a career. And people never get out
Yeah.
of the thought loop as well. That keeps a lot of people stuck and not realizing that this is a process that is going to require some action and some curiosity, some dead ends, some exploration. It's a much more active process than people think. So many people, I think, are hit by barriers which stop between their ears and they get no further because they just get stuck in their own gremlins and mind chatter and a sense of, I don't know what the answer is. I've tried Googling it. I can't find it. Therefore, there must be no answer. I'm just going to have to
Mm.
suck it up. So yeah,
Well,
lots of
they're well, and I suppose going back to what we were saying earlier, they're expecting to find it,
mm,
like it's this diamond in the rough, like it's the needle in the haystack that somehow they'll finally come across it, and again they'll have this spark of enthusiasm and I don't know, yeah, light bulb
mm,
moment. Um, and it doesn't really work like that. So yeah, shifting the perspective
mm,
to yeah, there's no point rummaging around in the hay. I'm loving my analogies today. Because yeah, it's this yeah, that takes forever. So just sort of yeah, going back to the fairy lights, I suppose. So yeah, any other common fears or
yeah. I
barriers?
think one thing I hear, when I work with people before we kind of start working together, I always have a chat with people. All coaches do the same. They say, let's get on a call. You don't have to pay me. Let's just talk and let's hear what your issue is and see if I can help. Something I send them is a little kind of form to fill in with a few questions. And one of
Mm,
the things that comes up a lot is, I don't want to make the wrong decision. What if I get it wrong? It's that sense before they even start of, I need it. I need to know I'm going to get it right. It's going to be like you say, the kind of the one thing I need to be able to find it. And I think that's a very paralyzing fear
mm,
thought. This sort of idea that I've got this one go to name the thing. I in my book I talk about, it's the kind of Rumpelstiltskin scenario of that. If you know that fairy tale where Rumpelstiltskin says, you've got to guess my name, and if you don't get it right, it's all going to look bad for you, he says to this princess. And of course, you don't get one go to kind of get it right. It's not just like you've got to name the perfect job, but and as you work through the process with a coach or whatever, you realize that it's going to be lots of sort of exploration. You don't have to kind of
mm.
one day just go, it is called this, and this is how I get to it. And I've thought it all through, and right, tomorrow I start. Actually, you don't get to that without doing a lot of exploration and muddling along. But I think that keeps people stuck. The idea that they've got one shot, and if they get it wrong, it's an absolute disaster.
So what would you say to people who have that fear? I mean, you said a little bit there. What
Yeah,
more would
I
you
think I
say?
think what the way that a lot of career coaches work, and you and I be similar, is trying to initially trying to offset some of that by getting as clear as you can. So exploring with people, yeah, what do you really enjoy doing? What are your strengths? In the work that you've already done to date. It's people forget they think they've got to kind of find new information. Actually, a lot of the information that they need is they already have from the kind of 10,
Yeah.
20, 30 years of work they've already done. So it's like looking back, going, well, which bits of your work do you like? What are the activities that light you up, that you like to do more of, that energize you? So it's kind of letting them tap into that so they can think, no, I am pretty clear on what I don't like and what I do like. Inviting them to think about, well, what matters to you about work? Because sometimes people are really caught up in old models of like, this is what it's going to be successful. I need to make a lot of money. I need to have very high status, or, they've got views from their parents, perhaps, or a teacher of what is a proper job, what is a good
Hmm.
job or a real job. So asking them to say, well, what's important to you about work? Because for some people, yes, it's status and a particular salary. For other people, it's, I'm only happy if I'm in a brilliant team of people. Other people might say, no, it's all about the purpose. It's all about being in the right organization, doing something that for me is meaningful. So again, it's trying to get them to think, how how clear are you on what you want work to give you and what's important to you? It's about, saying to people, what are you really interested in? What excites you? Are you interested in helping people? Are you interested in science? Are you interested in data? Are you interested in writing, or whatever it is? So people's interests. And it's about, again, the practical stuff as well, checking in with people. Well, how much do you need to earn? What kind of place do you want to work in? What kind of hours do you want to do? So there is some thinking initially, definitely, that I think can
Mm.
offset that fear of getting it wrong, because you have at least committed to paper and really had a
Correct.
good look
Yeah.
at what you think is important, so that you have got a sense of a slight blueprint of, I think all of these things are important, so at least I can go looking for them now. But beyond that, the looking has to happen, because you can't just then take your piece of paper, and unfortunately there is no magic career machine that you feed it into. I mean, I know we were kind of encouraged to think that at school. There are tests that you can do that spit out a kind of, you should be a librarian at the end of it. I think that's what I got at school. And I look at that now, I'm like, there's no way I should have been a librarian. Unfortunately, it's not a science. Career redesign is an art, not a science. And I know that frustrates people, because they think, if only I feed in the right data, it will give me the magic answer. But actually, the important bit, again, when it comes to not getting it wrong, is knowing yourself as much as you can, but also then finding these little ways to test something. So it's the difference
Hmm.
between going, oh, I think I quite like interior design. It's the difference between going, right, I'm going to spend 4 grand and a year on an interior design course. That would be madness if you've never done it.
Mm.
And saying, well, actually, I think that sounds interesting. But there's so much I don't know. Maybe I'll just sign up for a 1 day course. Or
A
maybe I'll
bit like
just
you
say,
did.
yeah, maybe I'll just
Yeah.
say to my friend Alice, who's redoing her house, I've got a good eye for color. I've got lots of good ideas about where to source things. Can I come and help you do one room? And we just have a cup of
Yeah,
coffee and I'll
great
share some
idea.
ideas. It's that sort of thing. It's like, you're going to minimize your chances of getting it wrong if you do these mini sort of experiments, rather than thinking, I have to decide and then go all in. People who think, I would love to run a coffee shop. And then, you spend your life savings buying a coffee shop, and you suddenly, a week in, you're like, I hate running a coffee shop. I never speak to any of the customers. I never make any coffee. All I'm doing is the accounts and dealing with suppliers, all the stuff. I never even thought of that. It would be madness. Whereas if you think you want to run a coffee shop, you've got to at least have, worked in a coffee shop for a few Saturdays or whatever it is. Or you think, I'd like to
Mm.
do events. I see myself as a wedding planner. Before you go all in, there are ways you can test that and see, because the reality may not match the vision. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what you
Yeah.
can do to not get it wrong.
Yeah. I think that's such a great message, and something I'm always banging on at clients about. I think I've used the test drive analogy
Mm,
quite a lot. If you're buying a new car, you don't know if it's going to be the wrong decision unless you go and drive it for a
mm,
bit.
yeah.
Definitely. Um, okay. And I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, but I'm always really fascinated about the sort of psychology of change and why all these fears come up from it for us. Because as you say, they are so common. There must be something going on. Do you know much about what's going on that? leads to us all having these fears
Yeah,
of
I
change?
think, you and I as coaches, we get quite interested in sort of
Mm,
neuroscience. And I wouldn't claim to be an expert, I'm not a neuroscientist. But of course, when you're learning about coaching, and you do learn about the way the brain works, and we're very interested in kind of cognitive processes. And there are reasons why we find it hard to change, why we don't deal well with uncertainty. Because essentially, our brains have evolved as kind of prediction machines. We love certainty for two reasons. Because obviously, the more that we already know, the less energy the brain has to expend on trying to figure stuff out. It wants to think, I know what's going on. I'm going to rely on my old patterns of thinking. I'm going to stick with the world that I know, because that will save me energy and it will keep me safe. Again,
yeah.
there are scientists will say that the issue is that our brains haven't really evolved. We're still very risk averse. We're still very hypersensitive to
Mhm.
anything new or different, because we're going to perceive it as a danger.
Yeah.
But actually, that might have been the case when we were sort of living in the wilderness and there were wild animals. But actually, generally speaking, now, you change job, no one's going to jump out of a bush and savage you. But your brain still thinks it might. So
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
quite interesting responses that scientists look at in the brain, that when we're in positions of uncertainty and change, we can, instead of if we don't get to rely on the basal ganglia, which is where all the kind of old information is stored, where we like to be, because it's very low maintenance, it's very easy. Once we get up into the kind of prefrontal cortex, where we're having to deal with new information, we can quite quickly, and wrongly really, but it's biology, get triggered into the kind of fight, flight, or freeze response. So no wonder that you think, I can't do this is too scary. What if it all goes wrong? There's so much risk. And of course, you're actually miscalibrating it. Your brain is miscalibrating it. But it does mean that we just aren't good with uncertainty and change. There's some fascinating experiments. There's an experiment, I can't remember from where, but it's from 2016, where they did some experiments on people who were told that they were going to potentially, I think they were doing a computer game, and there was a risk that they might get an electric shock. And they measured people's stress levels. And people who were told you have a 50% chance of getting an electric shock were far more relaxed than people who were told, people who knew they were going to get an electric shock were far more relaxed than the people who said, there's a 50% chance that you might. We'd rather know something really bad is going to happen. We'd rather be certain of that, even though it's
Right, I
bad,
see.
than be in a situation where we're not sure something bad might happen. We're very uncertain, and the brain just doesn't like that. So, yeah, there's some
Yeah.
really fascinating stuff
Interesting.
about the way we respond physically and biologically to new impulses. But the good news is, I attended a course which is really interesting, called the Uncertainty Experts. It's a kind of almost immersive
Okay.
experience. It's a guy called Sam. Let me just have a look. Sam Conniff, and a cognitive scientist called Catherine Templer Lewis. They call themselves the Uncertainty Experts, and they've designed an experience which is meant to help you increase your tolerance of uncertainty and be more dexterous in your brain when it comes to dealing with new situations. Because they've realized, and scientists have realized, that the way your brain responds to uncertainty can be to flood you with all these sort of fight and flight and these dreadful sort of things that make you feel really scared. But the research also shows that if you can reframe that, not as a challenge, but as an opportunity, that heightened state your brain is in uncertainty, if you see it as a positive experience, actually biologically, what's going on in your brain is the optimum time to form new neural pathways. So a lot of the sort of chemical things that are happening in times of uncertainty actually allow neuroplasticity, the idea of forming new ways of
Right.
thinking. But of course, if we interpret it as this is really scary, it takes us in the
Yeah.
wrong direction. But if we can channel that response into a more positive thing of, okay, I'm in a really heightened state, but I can really lean into that. I can use it to grow new thoughts and to see this as an opportunity and not a threat. Then actually we can be in a really great place for learning and growth.
Mm. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know about that last bit. That's really, really helpful, that actually that's almost the best time to be changing up the routine and doing something
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah, I found it really
differently.
interesting. I have I have a knowledge at this kind of superficial level, but if people are interested,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, me
loads of
too.
fascinating, really serious research on the way our brain responds to uncertainty and change, and the way that you can then harness that And a lot of it, and you'll work with clients on this as well, but is to do with reframing things and trying to see, is this a problem or is this a challenge? Is this scary or is this exhilarating? There's not much we know from when you've watched a scary film or been on a roller coaster. There's a very thin line between fear and excitement, isn't there?
Yeah.
And so learning to try and coax your brain to be very self-aware and mindful of your responses to things and think, how am I going to choose to interpret this? Where am I going to look for my kind of growth mindset? Good old Carol Dweck, any coach, and probably a lot of your listeners will have heard of growth mindset. The idea that if you frame things as, here's an opportunity for me to expand my knowledge, to step into a new space. I don't have a fixed mindset where I only have a finite amount of resources and knowledge. I can grow, I can learn. It makes all the difference. There's lots of kind of tricks, cognitive approaches that you can take to try and be more welcoming of uncertainty and change. But it takes time. It's not something you do in 5 minutes.
Exactly, because you're having to sort of change those default habits, if you like, and the ways of thinking. Yeah, I think a lot of coaching is about just reframing things. I think that can be quite hard to do on your own. So, okay. Well, that's been really interesting, Rachel. Thank you very much. Fascinating to hear about your career change, and really lovely to hear about experiences with your own career change clients, and lots of helpful nuggets in there for people who perhaps thinking of doing that too, and a good book to perhaps buy along the way and support them through the journey. Anything else you think you would want to share?
I always say that at the beginning of my book, this isn't a plug for my book, this is, you can just do this. I think, the thing to do with career change, and it feels so counterintuitive, but I'm going to leave people with one thought, is the idea that career change is something that you should hold lightly. And that feels so counterintuitive because people are like, it's such a big thing. But actually, certainly at the starting point, instead of going into it thinking, I need to make a decision, the biggest thing that you can bring, and you'll tell your clients this as well, Alice, is curiosity. It's underrated. People are trying to make a decision. They're like, I need to make a choice. It's all about decisions. It's all about knowledge. It's not. It's about playfulness. It's about curiosity. It's about what's out there. It's about when all the thoughts of like, this isn't possible. You can't do that. This would never work. It's trying to go, I hear you. I'm just parking those thoughts for now. I'm just going to go and have a look. I'm just going to go and have some conversations. I'm just going to be curious about what's possible, because people try and make a decision way too early. Actually, just get out there, expose yourself to some new people, some new ideas, and the decision comes much later. Don't worry about making the decision. Just get curious about what you're interested in, what might be possible for you, and what excites you, and just follow the fairy lights.
Yeah. Well, and be okay telling other people that that's what you're doing. It's okay if people say, oh, what are you doing now? It's okay to say, I don't know. And actually feeling proud of that, and there to be, as you say, joy and curiosity and pride in that. It's okay not to know, and to be in a space where you are working it out and testing and exploring. And
exploring is the word, I think. I often say to my clients, position yourself as an explorer. I think it was probably our colleague John Lees, who's a great career coach, who said that. It's not, I can't lay claim to that, but it's, people feel like, oh, I have to present some amazing kind of narrative of what I'm doing, which when you're early in the stages is really hard. But I think if you just say, do you know what, I'm exploring a couple of ideas that I've got, I'm just following my gut and having a look around. And I think that takes the pressure off as well. You're not saying, I've decided I must become a vet, or I've decided I'm going to retrain as an accountant. It's just like, I'm exploring, I'm taking some time, and you'd be amazed. Actually, most people, because we're all human, and we've all had times where we don't like our work, or we've thought, what else is possible? People are hugely interested. They're like, oh, really? How are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, I'd quite like to,
that's what you get the most. So I wish I could do. I wish I had the courage to do that. Well, and also I say to people that often people's reactions, if they are funny about it, going back to what you're saying about the neuroscience, is because they can't then put you in a box. So their brain is struggling to make the shortcut because our brains make shortcuts, as you say, so we understand the world and save energy. But you, by saying, well, I don't have a label at the moment, if they respond weirdly, it's because of what's going on for them. It's nothing to do with you. So again, it's just, as you say, the sort of lightfulness and playfulness and not worrying too much about what people think. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, Rachel.
We'll take it offline, Alice. We'll have a cup of coffee.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was really, really lovely to talk to you, and thank you for coming onto the podcast, and wish you all the best. And yeah, I'm sure we'll chat on.
Yeah, lovely to speak to you, Alice. Thanks for having me.
All right then. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.